Good morning, Murray. Happy Hanukkah, first of all, to everybody.
Happy
Okay,
Hanukkah.
okay. So the last thing that we were learning was on Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph 37a. We started getting into the twin ovens that were side by side, and that's the bottom of the page of Tashma Kirot Hamatimot. Right? We spoke about if we have two stoves and the twin stoves are right next to each other. One stove was Grufa and one stove was Grufa, and one stove the coals were removed. Good morning, Nathan. And one stove the coals were not removed, and they were right next to each other. So we said Beit Kirot, two stoves. Achat Amatimot, twin stoves right next to each other. Achat Grufa Tuma, one stove either the coals were removed or the coals were covered with ash. And there was one stove that was not grufa tuma. It was not the ashes were not, it was not covered with ash. It was not the coals were not removed. It was fully burning. The stove was really fully burning, open flame. The writer says mashin agabe grufa tuma. Now the Gemara now is trying to prove whether Hananiah's opinion is correct or not. Remember, Hananiah went on record and he said you could leave food on an open fire before Shabbat. The coals are there. You didn't remove the coals as long as the food is more than, let's say, it's reached the level of Maichal ben Drasai, which some say is 50% cooked. Once it's reached 50% cooked, you could go ahead and you could leave food on that open flame according to Hananiah. And we're trying to see his opinion, meaning is his opinion correct? Is it supported by other places or not? So now we're going to try or to at least attempt to prove not like Hananiah's opinion, because here we have the Breita that talks about two stoves. That one the coals were removed, one the coals wasn't removed. Mashin agabe gufak tuma. It says you could leave on the stove that's gufa tuma, specifically the stove that the coals were removed. Good morning, Adam. But the ain machine, but you can't leave on zesha in a gufa in a tuma. You can't leave. We're now on 37A2, but you can't leave on the one that the coals were not removed. And mahin machine, what type of food could you leave on the stove that was not the coals that you took out? Sorry, on the oven that you removed the coals. We said you can't leave food on the oven on open flame, but where you have to remove it, and the flame has to be removed. You have to go ahead and remove the coals or cover the coals. And what could you leave on there in that situation? So Beishamai Omrin, Beishamai says the lo klum. Beishamai says you can't leave. Beishamai says you can't leave anything. You can't leave anything. If he says Beishamai holds that you can't leave on. He holds you can't leave anything, even on a stove that the coals have been removed. You don't leave anything. And it could be. Good morning, Jaime.
Good
Welcome
morning.
back.
Good
Happy,
morning.
happy,
Thank you.
happy Hanukkah.
Thank you to you too.
I was thinking about you this morning. I said I owe you a call.
Okay, always welcome.
Okay, thank you so much. So, just to bring everybody up to date, we're discussing here in our Gemara, can a person leave food on a fire before Shabbat if the food has reached a level of 50% cooked? Do we say that once it reached a level of 50% cooked and it's before Shabbat, you're not going to come to stoke the coals? That's the question. Will you stoke? Do we have to be afraid that you're going to become, when it comes Shabbat, you might come to stoke the coals. The stoking the coals is a biblical prohibition of making a fire, right? Because you take a fire that's hidden within the coals and you stoke it and you bring it out. You make the fire larger. So we saw there's an argument between Hananiah and the Chachamim that Hananiah has a very lenient opinion. He's a lenient opinion, and he says, "Morning, Levi." The Hananiah says, that you're allowed to leave food on an open flame as long as it reaches 50%, a minimum of 50% cooked, according to some opinions. It's 50%. Some opinions say 33 and a third percent cooked. As long as it reaches a third cooked, some say it's 50% cooked. Then Hananiah says you don't have to worry about it.
You're talking about before Shabbat, right?
Before Shabbat. We're talking
Okay.
about before Shabbat.
Right.
The Chachamim say no. The Chachamim are more strict. They say even if it reaches 50%, if it's not fully cooked, and if the food is improving by being on the stove, if it's not fully cooked, even if it's fully cooked, if it's improving, it's getting better, you cannot leave the food before Shabbat on an open flame. You have to cover the flame. Put a piece of blech, put a metal between the flame and the pot, and that will ensure that you won't come to stoke, right? If you put the metal, you're covering up the coals, so you're not gonna stoke the coals.
Is there a proper time before Shabbat? Or how much time before?
Right. This would be according to any amount of time, as long as you put it on before Shabbat. The same way you put the blech on right before Shabbat. You could be able to, according to Hananiah, as long as it reached 50% before Shabbat, you won't even need to put the blech. You won't have to put the covering. And according to the other opinions, any moment that you have to cover it, a moment before Shabbat, as long as before Shabbat you cover the fire, you're good. You can leave the food there. You can leave the food there. And here the Gemara says we have twin ovens, twin towers, twin ovens, two right next to each other. Not exactly like the Twin Towers. They were, I mean, can't tell you exactly how close they were to each other before. But we're talking about two ovens that there's just a earthenware wall that separates the two ovens, two stoves. And one has coals in it, and one you remove the coals. And it says you can't keep food on both of them, because you can't keep the food on the one that's open, the open fire. And it doesn't make a difference whether it's 50% cooked, not 50% cooked. So you can't keep it on the one that's open fire. So that would seem to indicate not like Hananiah that says as long as 50% cooked, you keep it there. So this is part of the Gemara's proof. And then the Gemara says, even the one that you could keep, we said that but one of the stoves has no coals. So it has no coals in it. So Beit Hillel will say, okay, no coals. So Beit Hillel in this bright that says you can keep hot water if you want to have water liquid, because liquid doesn't require as much cooking. You don't have to. It doesn't take as much time to cook like solid foods. And solid foods, he says you wouldn't be able to keep solid foods on that stove, even though the stove you remove the coals. Even though you remove the coals, he says you can't keep solid food according to this opinion. Now we saw in our Mishnah held that Beit Hillel says, listen, if you remove the coals, we're not going to be more strict regarding solid food or liquid food. You remove the coals, but this opinion says that we're going to be more strict regarding the solid foods. And what could be the reason for it? If you remove the coals, what are you afraid of, right? What should you be afraid of? So there is an opinion that suggests that maybe even when you remove the coals, maybe there's a certain amount of coals that you might not have removed. You might not have done a great job, and therefore you might come to stoke those coals that are left out of concern. But the stoking coals that are left, it's only a concern on solid foods, which require more cooking, more heating. So therefore, Beit Hillel would make a distinction. According to this Braita, he'll be strict by solid foods. He would not let you leave solid foods, even though good morning, Mark. Even though
Morning, Rabbi.
Morning, good to see you. Happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah.
even though you remove the coals, according to this Braita, Beit Hillel would be strict and say you cannot leave solid food. But Beit Shammai would be even more stricter. Beit Shammai omrim that ain't low klum. You can't even leave any food, even liquid, hot liquid on this stove that does not have any coals. So what is he? Either you could learn pshat that Beit Shammai is afraid that even you might find coal. You mean you remove the coals, you might still find some coals there. You might find a coal, you might not have done a perfect job, you might come to stoke it. So he's afraid even by the liquid. Or you could some learn removing of coals does not mean you have to remove the coals totally outside the oven. You can remove the coals just means moving it to the side. And maybe he's concerned that maybe you might come to move it back. So Beit Shammai says you won't be able to leave any food. Some want to say that um, that's how it seems from Rashi. Some want to say it's possible to suggest that Beit Shammai is strict over here is because of the heat that's coming from the coals that are next to this stove. Because remember, there's twin stoves, and one stove has the coals in, one stove the coals out. So maybe that's perhaps why he's strict with the stove, even though the stove doesn't have the coals, but it's tantamount. It's maybe you could perceive it. We could treat it like a stove that has coals because it's receiving heat from the adjacent stove. But from Rashi, it would seem that Beit Shammai would say no. There's no allowance to leave food on the stove, even a separate, private, independent stove that's not a twin stove next to another stove. You would not allow you to leave food on a stove. Period. But Beit Hillel says chamin ovelo tavshil. Beit Hillel says you could leave hot liquid, but you cannot leave food. You can't eat food because Beit Hillel is going to be a little more strict regarding solid food over here, which require more cooking, and maybe you're going to come to more concern. You might come to stoke in case there's something left in the oven. Now okar, and now the Mishnah, the Brisa continues. Okar, if you took a food that was on the stove from before Shabbat and you remove the food, divrei hakol lo yalzir. Everybody holds you will not be able to put the food back onto this oven, even though the oven had no, you removed the coals. So this opinion would say you still cannot lo yalzir. You could not put the food back on top of the oven, maybe because they would be concerned maybe it looks like cooking, even though maybe the coals aren't there, but still it looks like cooking. However, Rabbi Yehuda says, Beit Shammai Omrim, he has a more lenient understanding of the Machlokah between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. He says, Beit Shammai Omrim, if the stove if you remove the coals before Shabbat, he says Beit Shammai would allow you to leave chamin. You could leave water, hot water. The coals are removed. What are we afraid of? You might come to stoke. There's no real coals to stoke because you remove the coals. Then you're going to tell me maybe you left the coal or something. You might come to stoke it. It doesn't need hot water, liquid. It doesn't need so much. So therefore, we're not afraid that you're going to come to stoke the liquid. However, overload tafshil. But you can't leave. Beit Shammai says you can't leave cooked food. Now, everybody most probably wondering, Rabbi, we know we're more strict regarding certain things from Shabbat on liquid more than solid. What does that mean? That means on Shabbat, when you take out from your refrigerator the Sfardim that take food from the refrigerator that's fully cooked on Shabbat. Let's say they'll take a drumstick, or they'll take a piece of deli, right? A piece of kugel, that you put on a blech, on a, you put it on some sort of, metal that's on top of a fire, or whatever warming instrument that they allow you to use, they will say you only use a dry solid, not a liquid. But a liquid we're more strict, because that's because that's talking about doing it on Shabbat. When you're taking a liquid, a cold liquid on Shabbat, so we're more strict. We look at a liquid to say that if you heat it up, even though it was once cooked, we say maybe we're concerned that there's a cooking after cooking once it was a liquid, because now that the liquid is no longer hot, it's considered such a great improvement that you're doing with the liquid, and we look at it like cooking, and therefore we're not going to put liquid on that hot plate. We're not going to put liquid on the blech on Shabbat, even though it was fully cooked before Shabbat.
Does
But
it evaporating? Isn't it evaporating have something to do with it? I always thought that the liquid evaporating has something to do with it.
what I recall, we can look more into it. I thought it has to do because it's a much greater improvement. Let's say let's say you take a cold water water that was once heated up, and you made hot water, and
Right.
now that it becomes cold, so the transformation, that when you go in and you reheat it up, it's like a total change, or whatever that. It's a much greater change to say that it's like it's cooking. Now, what is the technical reason why? What is it? How it works, but it seems like it's making something that it's considered much more of a change, went from a cold liquid to a hot liquid. But we could look more into that. But
But it seems they have the opposite approach here.
right, that's why I want to point that out, because that's talking about on Shabbat, doing something on Shabbat, taking a cold food from a refrigerator and putting on. Adam, is it clear? Taking cold food from a refrigerator, putting on the blech or on the hot plate, because the improvement that's being accomplished through a liquid is much greater accomplishment. The change of when it's reheated, and there we're more strict, and we say yesh bishul acha bishul. Once it was already cooked, it could be possibly cooked again, and therefore we say we're not going to allow you to go ahead and put the liquid on the blech or on the hot plate on the Shabbat, because maybe we're going to look at the liquid, the improvement that's happening to the liquid, like it's a new cooking. However, the solid, which was already cooked beforehand, the change is very much more minimal by the fact by heating up a solid, and there's not a great change in the makeup of the food, and therefore you would be allowed to put that solid back onto the blech. You won't put it on an open fire, right? You won't put a pot of chicken, of drumsticks on a fire on Shabbat that's on. But you put it on the pot was already cooked, fully cooked before Shabbat. Now you can put it on the blech, because that's the issue of is that an act of recooking or not an act of recooking? That has to do with on the Shabbat. But here we're talking about before Shabbat, what requires when you're taking something that's not cooked, or a type of food that's not cooked, what type of food that's not cooked requires more cooking to cook something. So it requires more cooking to cook a salad than to take. It requires more involvement than to cook a liquid, and therefore we find that there are opinions in Beit Shammai that when it comes to before the Shabbat, leaving food before Shabbat on a certain type of stove,
Leaving uncooked food.
leaving uncooked when it's not right. Uncooked
Cooked
food.
food is something different.
Cooked food,
then it's
cooked food,
warming.
right, cooked food is already different,
And you're
right.
talking about before Shabbat starts.
So before Shabbat, that's where we find the distinction of before Shabbat, that regarding whether you can leave food there, whether you can leave hot liquid or not hot liquid, or would we only allow hot liquid, we won't allow you to leave a salad, because that there, it requires more cooking. So we're talking about something that was not yet cooked, which requires not fully cooked yet and requires more cooking. So that's where we're saying over here, Beit Hillel omrim chamin. So this opinion has this now, but however, Yehuda Omer, Yehuda says Beit Shammai omrim. Beit Shammai says you could leave on a um, on a on a stove that you remove the coals. You can leave hot food, hot liquid. I'm sorry, of a low tafshil, but you can't leave a tafshil. You can't leave a cooked food, a salad, because it requires more involvement, more cooking. However, Beit Hillel omrim, Beit Hillel says muta. Beit Hillel says chamin v'tafshil. Beit Hillel says you could leave both hot liquid, and you could leave both salad on a stove that you remove the coals before Shabbat. You remove the coals before Shabbat. We're not afraid. We're not so concerned there's going to be anything left to stoke. You already removed the coals. Hopefully you did a good enough job. Now, Beit Hillel omrim. So now the Gemara says, Beit Shammai omrim notlin. Beit Shammai says that you could go ahead and you could remove, right? You remove the hot. Beit Shammai allows you to leave the hot water before Shabbat, according to this opinion. So you can remove it on the Shabbat of a lo mazirin, but you can't put it. You can't put it back even if the stove is. You remove the coals, right? You remove the coals. You can't put it back. Beit Shammai most probably holds that just putting it back, even though you remove the coals, right, maybe has an appearance of cooking. You're putting food back onto the stove, even though there's nothing. There is. You remove the coals, but it has an appearance most probably of cooking. That could be his reasoning. And he says you cannot go ahead and if you're looking for that, if you can't go ahead and put back the pot, even though the stove removed the coals. Beit Hillel says, what's the problem? It's not going to look. It's not looking. He doesn't hold it looks like cooking. Once you remove the coals, so he says you could return. Beit Hillel omrim af machzirim. Beit Hillel says you could go ahead and good morning, Mark. You could go ahead and return you can return the foods as well on Shabbat. By the way, you're going to see in the art scroll, I mean, at least in the Hebrew edition, maybe you'll see in the English, they'll see they're going to make a whole chart for all the different opinions in Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel, and Hananya, Chachamim, all the different opinions, they're going to have a whole chart by the end of the day. Yes. Now the Gemara says the following. Amrit, we are on 3782. By the time everybody finishes the Gemara, when you're walking in the street, you'll be thinking about this because we're going to be talking about this subject for a little while. If you say the opinion of the Mishnah, remember the old question, what does the Mishnah mean when it says lo yitain? Does the Mishnah mean you can't leave food before Shabbat unless you remove the coals? Because that's the original question. Do you have a right? The basic question of the Gemara is, can I leave food before Shabbat on an open flame once it's already, let's say, 50% cooked? That is the question. Okay, so according to Sfardim, technically they are lenient, by the way. They're allowed. What? I mean, a lot of people are strict. You know what I'm saying? We have to see what. we'll take out the Shulchan Aruch. We'll see. But the Sephardi halacha, the Yalkut Yosef is very clear, Mark. It's very clear that halachically now doesn't mean, you know, he might recommend, might be a nice chumrah. What? Right, you can never, but Mark is saying, you can never put food on Shabbat, on the Shabbat itself, on an open fire. Because that, why not, Mark? Because that, even if the food is 1,000% cooked, it looks like cooking. Right? Even if something, I can't put a pot on a fire, but Rabbi, it's already cooked. What's the problem? I'm not cooking. It's already cooked. The answer is, one reason is because it looks like cooking. So that is why I can't put, but the question here in the Gemara is before Shabbat. Before Shabbat, when it's not fully cooked, but it's reached the level of what? 50% or more of cooked, can you leave a pot on a fire? Now, we have to look at the Yalkut Yosef. It doesn't mean he might, I don't think in his house he actually did it himself. He might have been strict, you know what I'm saying? Put something, you know, down to cover the fires. But I'm saying, it might be a stringency that people should be left, even in such a circumstance. But that the technical law for Sfardim is that they would be able to leave on a open fire as long as it reached more than 50% cooked, because we're not afraid, because you did it before Shabbat, Ralphie did it, and we're not afraid that he's going to come to stoke the flames, being that it's already 50% cooked, right, Adam? If it's only 30% cooked, then we're concerned that he might come to stoke the flames. So, but that's a little bit, we're going to see more of the Ashkenaz. We'll take out the Shulchan Aruch, we'll see. But, so the Gemara says the following. By the way, I never saw in an Ashkenaz home a pot on a fire, on a revealed fire. Every Ashkenaz, no one in Ashkenaz, I never saw Ashkenaz home that you have a pot, even if it's half cooked, 3/4 cooked, fully cooked. I don't care how much it's 1,000% cooked. We'll never have a pot. You know, I haven't seen that. Now, again, really, that doesn't mean would they have to have the blech, because first of all, now, but what about if, but technically we'll see, you know, this argument of Hananiah Chacham, even the rabbis that are strict, that don't allow 50% cooked, be on open flame. Morning, Nathan. But what about if it's fully cooked and it's not improving? It's getting, the more it's on the fire. They usually, if you leave something on the fire, the more it's improving. It's getting better. But if let's say it's drying out. Let's say, but you want to get it. So therefore, right there, maybe then the other opinion would say, you know, we're not afraid. You're not afraid you're going to justify it to make it stronger, right? So therefore, you make it lower. Yeah, but lower is not the same. We have to see, because lower is not the same. There's a malacha called making a fire on Shabbat. There's a malacha on Shabbat extinguishing a fire. But there's extinguishing a fire. But to extinguish a fire on Shabbat, there is also a question: what type of extinguishing would be a biblical violation? Right? I mean, if I have a fire and I blow out a fire on Shabbat, did I do a biblical prohibition? Do I do a rabbinic prohibition? Why? Because their opinions say that the only time you'll be violating extinguishing on Shabbat, if you extinguished it with because you created, you did something, you improved, you made it constructive, as we spoke about. But you didn't prove anything. But you didn't intend. You didn't. Right, but you didn't. This act did not create a coal, right? If you light a fire, if you light a piece of wood, morning, Rabbi, and you light a piece of wood and then you blow it out, that you're creating a coal. But here, I'm saying that might make now. So maybe if you would hold it's not a biblical issue, so maybe they wouldn't make a gzeira on a gzeira. You know what I'm saying? That's why the lowering might not be a great concern, because it's only a don't do this because you might do that. But if you might do that, if that also will only be rabbinic, that might be a double rabbinic. Therefore, that might not be a problem, a concern that we have to be afraid of. You know what I'm saying? So that might not be a concern that we have to be afraid of. So maybe that might be a situation that even the people that are strict and they would put it on, but if it's on open flame, but it's totally cooked and it's not improving by being, the longer it's on it, it's not improving. So that might be a situation that people might be willing to do possibly. That if then even according to the stricter opinion, that situation, there's very little to be concerned for. But again, we'll have to see as we develop the Gemara. We're now in the factory. We're in the manufacturing process here, but this is where all the halacha is coming from our Gemara. This is all we're getting to understand where it's coming from. Then we'll see look at the Shulchan Aruch, how it evolves to the bottom line, modern day. Okay. So now the Gemara says, if you say good morning, Gary, happy Hanukkah. We're on 3782 on the first bottom of the first column. We say hello in person to Nathan. If we say Lashotnan, that the Mishnah, our Mishnah, that says Lo Yitain, you can't place, is referring to before Shabbat, because the whole issue is how to understand the Mishnah. The Mishnah, the rabbi of the Mishnah knew what he was talking about. But as time goes on, we, the later generations, had sometimes, the rabbi in the Mishnah spoke very short. Sometimes he said certain things that he understood what he means, but some we're not clear. The later generation, we repeat what the rabbi said, but we have a question. What do you mean by lo yitain? Do you mean before Shabbat you're talking about on Shabbat returning? That's the whole issue of our Gemara, that in the yeshiva, they want to understand what is the case, what is the Mishnah talking about? As Mr. Haber would say, I spoke to Mr. Haber by way recently. He sounds good. Oh, he sounds good, thank God. Yes. Right? He seems on target. Right, thank God. Should be well. If you say Lashotnan, that the Mishnah that says you can't place unless you remove the coals, if the coals have been removed, is talking about before the Shabbat. If that means before, which is the stringent opinion, so then matnitin mani, which the Tana of our Mishnah who is the author of our Mishnah, right? We just brought a Braita. We brought a Braita between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. And we have two opinions in the Braita. So if we say that our Mishnah, if we understand our Mishnah is talking about before Shabbat, that it has to be removed, you have to remove the coals, so he will fit in like Rabbi Yehuda. So the author of our Mishnah would be Rabbi Yehuda, because the Braita said, right? Rabbi Yehuda's opinion was you have to remove the coals before Shabbat, and also he also said that according to Beit Hillel, you could go ahead and once you remove the coals, you can leave any food you want, liquid or solid, before Shabbat, and
Hi.
everything.
Morning. How you doing?
Everything was in sync.
Good to see you.
But
How are you? Good, including
if
you.
you say,
Happy holidays.
but if you
You're well?
say that the
Good.
Mishnah is talking about
I'm
returning,
okay. Yes.
if the Mishnah is talking about returning,
No.
which means
Thank
that the
you.
Mishnah is saying that the only thing the Mishnah is limiting you is on the Shabbat itself. It's the issue you can't if it's a question you have to in order to return food on Shabbat, it has to the coals had to have been removed. But regarding leaving food before Shabbat, if you learn the Mishnah, that the Mishnah is saying don't return food unless the coals have been removed, that means if it's before the Shabbat, maybe you could even leave it there even if the coals are not removed, right? The approach of the Mishnah, right? Remember the approach that if the Mishnah is the limitation and the restriction of the Mishnah is talking about returning food, and the Mishnah requires to return, if you want to return food, the coals have to have been removed. But that's because you're doing that act on the Shabbat itself. And on the Shabbat itself, it looks like cooking if you return it to something which the coals are not removed to an open flame. But before the Shabbat, you could even put it on open flame to 50%, the Sephardi style, right? Even if it's 50% cooked. So, I mean, we want to be, there's two opinions. It could be strict, I'm not saying you have to be strict, you know what I'm saying? So, so therefore, who is the author of the Mishnah? Because both opinions say here in the Braita that if both opinions say you can't leave food on these twin ovens, right? We have these twin ovens. One was the coals were removed, one the coals wasn't removed. It says if the coals were not removed, you can't leave food. Clearly, you can't leave food. And the Mishnah, if you're learning that the Mishnah would allow, with the inference would be you're allowed to leave food, so that our Mishnah does not follow any of these Tanaim. So that's what the Gemara will continue tomorrow in search of who is the author of our Mishnah. If you learn the Mishnah is only limiting returning, but you could leave food on open fire, this Braita, both opinions say you can't leave food on open fire. It can't be Yehuda and it can't be Reb Meir. So who is it? Stay tuned, everybody. Have a beautiful day. I think we're getting more. The more we're learning it, the more it's getting into us. These are concepts, and hopefully when it comes to Shabbat, we'll have a much clearer understanding of what's going on in the kitchen. Thank you. Have a great day. Great Shabbat. You take. Have a great day. Happy Hanukkah. All the best. And by the way, remind your friends. Everybody. We had a very beautiful party. Asaf was there. And Asaf Gola was there. Adam Yochanan, who's here right now, was there. We had how do you yeah, send it with a limousine, Mark. Come on, or a jet. Okay, we missed. It was really we had a very nice turnout. Very, very beautiful turnout. Thank God. It was really beautiful. Adam spoke. A number of people spoke. Yeah, it was really. We missed everybody, and we'll hopefully have another party, B'ez Hashem, hopefully soon. Happy days for everybody. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you. Remind everybody about Hallel, Mark. I think Hallel gets lost in the shuffle. A guy in NYU came over to me, Rabbi. It was like 2:00 yesterday. Rabbi, I didn't say Hallel. Check the group. Right. People don't go to shul. They're all lighting the menorah, right, Gary? But are they saying the full Hallel? They've got Hallel. So I'm telling you, the halacha is you can say Hallel the whole day. Right. They can say Hallel the whole day if you didn't say it in the morning. But people, you're right. You have to be in it to win it. Have a great day, everybody. So Gary, we're encouraging you. Have a great day, Ralph. Take care. Take care.